All right, folks, we are live. It is me, 138 MMA, everybody's favorite. Just kidding. I'm here with Chris from the MMA Ecosystem. Chris is a fantastic guy. He knows everything Asian MMA. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's like your one championship. That's your UAE Warriors. That's your Ryzens. That's your like literally everything Asian MMA. That's what Chris dives into. He does that on a daily basis. He does a fantastic job with it. His channel, he actually recently put out a video on One itself and kind of the changes that One has made over the last few years. Fantastic. I definitely recommend you guys checking that out. But Chris is here, and he's going to give us a little bit of his take on kind of what he has about the fighters in the Road to UFC tournament. We've got 3 fights now. One of them fell out. It's rescheduled for a later time. But we're gonna get his take. We're gonna get my take. It's gonna be a good time. But Chris, tell everybody about yourself a little bit. Give your background, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tyler. Happy to be on here. So I have been in MMA media for about 3 years now. And really, a couple years ago, I was just like, man, like there's just not enough coverage of the Asian MMA beat in the English-speaking media. I have no idea what's going on. I have to translate a bunch of pages. I have to hunt things down on social media platforms. And I basically just set out to create the media platform that I always wished that I had, covering Chinese MMA, Japanese MMA, everything in East, Southeast Asia, a little bit of Kazakhstan, and put it all into one place, make it digestible, and hopefully connect a lot of English-speaking fans to Asian athletes, because I'd spent some time over mostly in China through my college years, and really wish that people could, that there could be some kind of cultural connect, and knew that if the UFC were to ever expand in China, expand in India, a lot of these different countries in Asia, that English-speaking fans would just fall in love with all these athletes. And it's slowly starting to happen, but hopefully I can be part of that wave to kind of push it forward a little bit more.
Yeah, and so I think now that the UFC is trying to get that market from the Asian market, I think that's kind of something that that's going to kind of bring your content into kind of the mainstream, because a lot of people are going to see what you do and they're going to say, oh, he was talking about this fighter, 2 years ago, when they're just now getting to the UFC after they've, maybe it's Road to UFC, maybe it's the Contender Series, maybe it's whatever. But they'll be like, this Chris guy's been knocking out this stuff for like 2 years on this guy. He's been covering him when he was fighting in whatever promotion, over in Kazakhstan, like you said. So that right there, that alone is going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards you as the UFC taps into that market. Because I know they're really shooting for that Chinese market right now, as well as, India is a big one, and they're looking for Japan. The Middle East has always kind of been, something that the UFC hits a little bit, with like the Russia adjacent countries that are in the Middle East kind of thing. But they're really now trying to get everything from a global perspective. And I think that's what's going to really tie it all together. But here we've got the Road to UFC tournament, and it's going to cover a lot of – it's basically just China versus Japan at this point. We've got China versus Japan in 2 matchups, and one of them is China versus China. And in fact, they're actually training partners, from what I understand anyway. You probably know more about than I do, but from what I understand, Li Kai-wen and Yi Jia are both training partners. Is that correct?
They are and they aren't. They have trained a lot together in the past at the UFC PI in Shanghai. Currently, for Li Kai-wen, he kind of floats around a lot. Originally, he's from Tianjin Top Team, which is kind of near Beijing, within China. But for this training camp, he trained at Bong Tao MMA and Muay Thai down in Phuket, Thailand. But they have trained a lot together in Shanghai.
Perfect. So yeah, that's probably good that they're not currently training together for this one, because that kind of worries me. Because we've seen kind of like on the Ultimate Fighter, it was Roosevelt Roberts and Austin Hubbard. When they fought, it was not the best fight because they were buddies and they didn't want to hurt each other. But from what I've seen in interviews, in the little bit that I've gathered, it sounds like these guys are going to go out there and put on a show. I think it was Li Kai-wen that said he wants to put on a show with this fight so good that both of them get in the UFC. So hopefully that's what we get. We've also got another jam-packed, couple of matchups here. We got Ray Saruya taking on Jinu Seiyi. I don't know how to say that. You're gonna have to correct me on
it's
that
tough. It's Jinu Shiye, and that is the Mandarin Chinese version of his birth name. So
Oh,
he is of E ethnic minority, and which if he wins this UFC contract, he'll be the first fighter from this E ethnic minority to get into the UFC. And there's a lot more of this ethnic minority kind of coming from Southwest China that are on their way. But yeah, Jinyu Shirye is his name.
Jinyu Shirye.
Yeah.
Okay. That's about as close as I'm going to get. See, this is
Yeah,
why
good
we've
luck.
got you here, Chris, because you're the man with this stuff. The other matchup we're going to break down is Rong Zhu or Zhu Rong, depending on, I think it's Zhu Rong. Yeah. Either way, whatever one it is, you'll correct me when we get there. But he's been in the UFC. He's went through the tournament now. He looks a lot sharper now than he did before. And he's taken on Shin Haraguchi. Probably also not how you say that, but
Nailed it.
I did. Oh, awesome. That's actually fantastic. So we've got a bunch of good matchups. In fact, let's go ahead and just dive right into the first one. The first one I want to start with is the Ray Saruya versus, oh shoot, I'm already going to mess this up. Junior
Right.
Shirye.
Yeah, you can also just call him G too.
G. Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. But yeah, so what did you see from both of these guys, not only in their Road to UFC tournament matchups thus far? What have you seen from these guys in their regional stuff, whether it be the Japanese or the Chinese regional scene? What have you seen there? What are your thoughts on this matchup in general? And ultimately, who do you think is going to win, and how does it look from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh man, I am so pumped for this fight. I feel like I have like a prediction in my heart, but I also like Jinyu Shirye has been the dark horse of the whole tournament for me. He really, before he fought in Road to UFC, he had not fought really anybody of note, hadn't really took on any big names, and hadn't ever really even fought for like a belt in China. Was really an under the radar kind of guy. And even in the UFC PI, like he tried to get into the PI a couple of years ago, but he got cut from the program. I don't know what the story was, if he wasn't good enough, what it was, but he has looked incredible in this tournament. He always gets picked against in every fight, but and he's, I'm guessing probably the big underdog in this fight with Ray Tsuruya, but he has impressed me so much with his composure, and one of those guys where it's like everything he throws is just barely on point. No wasted movement in and out. He gets guys to the ground. And then in that first fight against Billy Pasawatan, his ground and pound was just like massive. He was throwing like he was a welterweight, and he's a small guy at flyweight. And so I feel like for him, I didn't really know his game before he came to Road to UFC because he was so under the radar. But it has been such a pleasure to watch him fight. His jab is really slick. He's fast on the feet, stays out of danger pretty well. And then on the ground, he cruised. Although, how's he going to do against a really good grappler like Ray Tsuruya? I have no idea. I need to see more from him to know how he's going to do. Tsuruya, on the other hand, both of these guys are crazy young. I think Jinyu Shirye is like 23. Tsuruya is just turned 21 years old. Super young. Ray Tsuruya, a phenomenal grappler. He honestly has fought pretty good competition in Japan when he was fighting in, I think he was in Pancrase before this, but he was submitting guys left and right, looked really good. And he had a lot of hype going in behind him when he entered the tournament, unlike Jinyu Shirye. So I feel like, they have, from what I've seen, just different styles. Like Ray Tsuruya throws a ton of offense, always trying to finish the fight, submission attempts, punching from every angle that he can. Whereas Jinyu Shirye is much more methodical, no wasted movement. So it's like the surgeon versus the tornado, basically, in this fight. And who wins? I don't know. I mean, I think it could end up being a pretty close fight. And ultimately, my heart says Ray Tsuruya, just because he is such his output is so high and he's throwing out so many sub attempts. And I honestly don't know if Jinyu Shirye can keep up with that over the course of 3 rounds. So I feel like Tsuruya is either going to get a decision or a submission, but oh man, what a fight.
I totally agree. And like you said, these guys are both super young. So for the guy that doesn't get in, I mean, they're probably getting in later, because I don't foresee either of these guys just going back to the regional scene and just getting destroyed. So I think they're both going to have good careers. Like you said, Junior Shurier, I'm going to butcher that. Either way, he in his last match, I believe it was the last matchup in the tournament, he fought last year's runner-up in Sungut Choi, I think is how you say that. And he did really well. He surprised everybody. And I don't know that anybody was picking him to win that fight. Like nobody. Because Sungut Choi looked really good in the tournament last year. And then, in fact, he was inches away from winning, like that close. And then this year, doesn't even make it to the finals because that Junior Cherier comes in and just puts on a good show. And everybody was kind of like, Sungut Choi didn't really look like himself, this, that, and the other. I don't think that was the case. I think it was just one athlete being a little bit better at what it is that he does than the other. And I think he was able to just put the work on him. And then he also had that other matchup earlier in the tournament where he finished it relatively quickly, looked really good there. That one was kind of like a let's see where these guys are kind of thing. I didn't really know much about either, but I was very impressed with him. So, but Ray Saruya, on the other hand, was a guy that coming in, I kind of had heard his name a few times. I kind of known who he was a little bit. And I believe it might have been the second round, but I believe it was the first round he fought. No, it was the second round that he fought Mark Climaco. Am I getting that wrong?
No, that's right.
Okay. Mark Climaco is a guy that I was familiar with because he was living out in California. So he's been around the U.S. regional scene. I knew who that guy was. He was a touted prospect, right? A lot of people thought Climaco was going to win. Saruya made him work just to the point that he couldn't keep up, and Saruya was fantastic. The dude just kept coming. He was just like a dog on a bone and just never slowed down. I think Ray Saruya is going to be a hard matchup for everybody in the division. I mean, outside the top, 10, top 15. But I mean, all these guys on, outside of that top 15 in the UFC are going to have a hard time with a guy like Ray Saruya just by the pace he puts on. Because he's putting on a pace like somebody that you think of like a Cody Durden, for example, in the UFC, except Saruya's got better control. And Saruya's got, more submission equity than somebody like Durden. Not to say that, everything's equal. Durden's probably the better striker, but Saruya just puts it on these guys. And I think at the age of, like you said, like 21 or something like that, give this guy 4, 5, 6 years. My goodness, he's going to be competing for titles at this point if he keeps the trajectory that he has. But like Zaza Kita said in the chat, I think that's how you say that. I'm horrible on names tonight, guys. Like he said in the chat, these fights, they were scheduled for a fight night card, but then it kind of got messed up. It was that UFC Shanghai that we were going to have. And then unfortunately, it wasn't like with visa issues and things like that kind of messed us up. Yeah. And it was visa. And then there was also like something with like permits or something. I don't know, but one thing led to another. And here we are. We're now in Vegas and we're down a fight. So either way, it's going to be good. I think it comes on right after the UFC card that same night, correct?
I saw on Fight Pass today, it was listed for 8:30 p.m. Pacific, which is 11:30 Eastern.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be right after.
Yeah, hopefully, assuming everything goes on time and they don't just get decision after decision and we go late. But either way, it should be right after. So it's basically like you see the main event and then you're like, sweet, I got 3 more fights. That's a win for me. So in that first matchup, I think Ray Saruya is getting it done. I think he's just going to be too much, but I don't think that that's going to be one of those things where this whole tournament, I don't think there's anybody in this. Well, maybe Zhu Rong, if he doesn't get the win, I could see something being the case where they're like, yeah, you already had your shot, man. This is your second one. But outside of that, everybody in this tournament has a chance to get back if they don't get the win. Like I think that's where we're looking at here. But when we look at the next matchup on the listing, we've got Li Kai-Wen and Yi Jia. Is Yi Jia or is it Jia Yi?
Nope, it's Yi Jia. It's so confusing because a lot of the minority guys like Jinyu Shurier, Rong Ju, and Yi Jia, what you're hearing is just like it's either their first or their last name, so it's together. But instinctively, we want to like split it apart, but it is actually just one name. So right. Yeah, Yi Jia, Rong Ju, and both those guys are Tibetans. So again, it's the Mandarin Chinese transliteration of their Tibetan birth names.
Okay, so like that's not even necessarily the exact way you pronounce their name. That's how it's been translated, kind of.
That's how basically like the Chinese government has written their name because it's in Chinese characters, Mandarin Chinese characters rather than a Tibetan script. So yeah, it sounds a little bit different. Cholun, if you all remember him, same thing.
Okay. This is the expert knowledge why we brought you on. Otherwise, I'd be on here rambling and just sounding like a total doofus. So
I mean, yeah, it's all
just
good.
kidding. I can talk about fights, but when I got to get their names right, that's hard.
I do too. Yeah.
Dude. So yeah, so in this fight, we got because Ija, he was in the tournament last year. Very, very close fight in the finals. Didn't quite get it done. It was good. A lot of people were on the other side. It was a good fight, right? Lee Kai Wen came into this one, looked great in one matchup, and then in the other, kind of I guess he won. What are your thoughts on this matchup? What do you think about these guys? What have you known about them prior to their tournament? And kind of who do you think is going to win this one?
Well, I feel like this is the case of two experts on the total opposite sides. It's not as simple as a striker versus grappler match, but Lee Kai Wen, a lot of you probably know he fought for one championship for really most of his MMA career before going to Road to UFC, and had quite a bit of success there. He's always been a big knockouts guy. His hands are probably some of the fastest hands I have ever seen of any featherweight anywhere, UFC or not. He throws so fast and so hard. You just have to go back to the Liu Kai fight in the opening round of the tournament this year to see that. So his striking is incredible. He moves his head really well, throws at different angles. It just seems like he is working at a couple levels above anyone else that he's fighting. And so going toe-to-toe with him, I don't know. Ija cannot go toe-to-toe with him. He's going to get taken out if he tries to go blow for blow with Lee Kai Wen. But yeah, so Lee Kai Wen, he was in one championship. They gave him Fabricio Andrade in his last fight in the promotion, which now we know, Fabricio Andrade, he's the champ now. That was a really tough fight, but he tore his bicep in that fight. Lee Kai Wen did, and then he was trying to get out of one championship for a long time. He finally gets out, so now he's able to pursue the UFC dream. Ija is one of those guys. He comes out of Unbo Fight, which is a massive gym in Sichuan province, which is southwest China. And that's if you hear of any Tibetan fighters, most likely they came out of this gym. Rong Ju comes out of there. Jinyu Shiye, who is an E-fighter, but kind of in the same area, comes out of there. Cholun, Sumudarji, all these guys come out of Unbo, and Song Yedong also comes out of Unbo Fight. So he's another guy coming out of there, and for him, it's all about his grappling. That's what really got him to the finals in the last season. But for Ija, he fought that fight, and he was really, really upset by that split decision loss to Lee Jong-young last year in the tournament finals. He was really, really bothered by that loss. Didn't understand why he lost it, and apparently just really set himself to change up his style to perfectly align with what the judges are actually looking for, which is more damage, more activity. His fight against Lee Jong-young was a lot more grapple and clinch heavy, control heavy, and that's why he thought that he won the fight. But yeah, and talking about fighters that could get signed afterwards, I thought Ija was going to get signed last year just because he had that split decision loss. It was really close. They signed Toshiomi Kazama and Jakasaragi, who both got finished in their finals fights. So
Sargi, rightfully so, though. That dude was fighting in the wrong weight class, and he hits like a hammer.
I'm okay with that. I can forgive that. It's our first fighter from Indonesia. Let's give him, try to give him some softball fights in the UFC and let him develop. I can look past that. Plus, he's just too much fun.
So much fun.
Yeah. So Ija, I think in this year's tournament fights, we really did see him change his style up. He got the armbar finish in round one, and then round two against Kim Sang-won, he fought in the semis, and he really struck with him for most of the fight, and which was surprising to me. I thought he was going to try and grapple a lot more and kind of go to his bread and butter, but I think he really wanted to show his striking and make a case for being signed to the UFC in case we get another situation where there's a split decision loss. So he's trying to strike a lot more. He's trying to be more exciting. His striking, I think, is decent, but still kind of coming along. It seems like he moves a lot of straight lines with his striking. Doesn't always move his head. Moves forward, backwards, throws straight punches. So I think he still has a little bit more there. That's why I say if he tries to strike with Lee Kai-Wen, he's going to get the light shut out because Lee Kai-Wen is just levels above Ejaw. But this one's hard to pick. It's hard for me to pick against Ejaw just because he does have such a controlling style. But I also picked him last year in the finals. Lee Jung-Young is a really good striker, so could be eating my words here. But I think he's going to get it done this time. Fair
enough. Okay, so interesting you mentioned that because in the finals last year, I was on the other side. Lee Jung-Young is how you say it, right?
Yep.
He's fighting Blake Builder the same night now.
Yeah, same night.
Yep. And I think he wins that one too, just to throw that out there. I think
he's a beast.
Blake Builder. But yeah. I was on the opposite side in that split decision, and it was so close that for me, I don't even honestly know who I thought won that fight. I watched it twice. I watched it when I first watched it because, to be honest, I had a bet on Lee Jung-Young. So for me, obviously, it's biased. After the bet already cashed, then I can watch it honestly and say, okay, who really won this fight? And it was so close that I wouldn't be mad with either. I mean, it was a good fight. It was really, really good fight. And Ejaw looked fantastic. And he looked fantastic in the tournament thus far. Lee Kai-Wen in one of his matchups, though, looked like a guy that is ready for the UFC. And I think that was his first fight. In his second one in the tournament, I don't know what happened. So I don't know if he's got consistency issues.
I don't know. That second round of the tournament, there's a couple fights in there that were a little slow. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder if these fighters that, they're coming in with this May, August, December timeline, okay, kind of mapping out, okay, I've got 3 fights. The first fight, a lot of times is the easiest because you get a lot more mismatches. Yep. And then the middle round, you're getting a tough fight, but it really doesn't matter how exciting you are. You're trying to make it to the next round as easily as possible, take as little damage as possible, and get ready for the finals. With Lee Kai-Wen, I recently rewatched that too, and I think it could have been a little bit of that, but I also, he was fighting Koya Konda, and Koya Konda was basically just kind of sidestepping the whole fight, a circle around the cage, and Lee Kai-Wen was just kind of following him. They started striking and going toe-to-toe a little bit when the fight started, and then all of a sudden Lee Kai-Wen's volume just dropped off. I wonder if he realized, hey, I don't know if I want to get in a firefight with this guy and getting knocked out. So let me just kind of try and snipe my way, just land just enough to get by here and make it to I have no idea if that's the story, but I agree. It was really weird. A lot of just kind of chasing around. Against Lee Kai-Wen, he didn't cut off the cage. That was a knock against them, was that his footwork was not effectively getting Koya Konda where he needed him to be. So there is that knock on Lee Kai-Wen and his striking and footwork. So wonderful to see that in the finals.
Yeah, I thought that same thing because he wasn't cutting him off, like you said, and I thought that was going to be an issue. And in this matchup, I don't know that it's going to really be an issue because I don't think Ejaw is going to be trying to use a lot of footwork to stay away. I think he's going to want to get in close and get the grappling going because I think that's his path to victory. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're going to run into that here. So I was one of the people that at the beginning picked Lee Kai-Wen to win the whole thing. But part of that was just because the dude just looks like he should be in the UFC right now. And so you look at the dude. So to be honest, part of it was that. But also after watching that first fight where he just looked like a savage, that was fantastic. So I was like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good about it. But now that they've come into this fight, his fight Ejaw did struggle in that last matchup. It makes it a lot closer. I'm still going to say Lee Kai-Wen's going to get it. I think he's going to floor him at some point. But my goodness, this is probably the toughest one to predict on this card. Because typically I side with grapplers over strikers because especially if they have good takedowns, which Ejaw does. If you can control where the fight takes place, if you're the better grappler with takedowns and control, essentially it's up to you if this fight stays standing or on the mat. And I think in this fight, Ejaw's got that. But at the start of every round, before that fight gets to the mat, Lee Kai-Wen's got a chance to land a bomb. And I think he's probably going to be able to land at least one. because we saw Ija get hit a few times in that Lee Jong-young matchup. And sure, he didn't go out in that one, but Lee Kai-Wen clearly hits like a truck. So I'm going to take Lee Kai-Wen. This is one that you just sit back and watch. You don't get too invested in like one side or the other. It's going to be a good fight. These guys, like you and I talked about earlier, these guys are trained together, but they're not trained together for this fight, but they've trained together in the past, and they do kind of have that friendly relationship. But they both said that they want this to be the best fight of the card. So I think we're going to get a good fight with these two. Zaza Kita mentioned something interesting here. Japan's had a recent influx of promising prospects, and when you think about it, they haven't up until just recently. Because, I mean, before we started seeing guys like Rinya Nakamura, Tatsuro Taira, before them, who's the last like Japanese prospect you can actually think of that made a split? I can't think of anybody. Like, I mean, I'm racking my brain and I can't think of any. That made like a really big, splash and say like the UFC level. If the chat happens to have somebody that you could think of, let me know. Drop that down there. Also, before we get into this main event or the last fight of this card, chat, if you guys have any questions for us or for Chris specifically, because on this channel now we've got his attention. I would love to get his knowledge on some Asian MMA stuff. So if you guys have some questions for him, drop that in the chat and we will get those questions to him ASAP. But we have the last matchup on this card that I would love to talk about. We have Rongju and Shin Haraguchi. I was very impressed with the changes that Rongju made from his time in the UFC originally to his time in this tournament. Now, I also wonder if some of that was level of competition. Obviously, the UFC is the highest level of competition on the planet. I mean, mostly. So some of that makes me wonder about that. But I think at the same time, he looked absolutely fantastic with his striking specifically. And he's also like a giant. Like, how tall is he? I do have it pulled up right here. He is a freak in height, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 5'9". And a lot of these guys are way shorter than him. Like in his last matchup, it was like, and he's 5'9". He's not even that tall, but he's way taller than 5'9".
He's got a decent reach too.
Yeah, he's got a freakishly long reach, doesn't he? Because like he seems, 72.5-inch reach. So that's like 6 foot. But so like he seems way bigger than all of his opponents. How tall was his last opponent? Because he towered over him from what I can remember. No, not really. They're pretty close. I don't know. He seems so much bigger than his opponents.
Just fights big.
Yeah, he fights like a big man. But, maybe it was the first matchup I'm thinking. He was quite a bit taller in his first matchup. That's it. I'm getting those mixed up. But either way, his striking looked way better in this tournament, and his grappling defense looked way better in this tournament than it had in the UFC. That's what I'm basically getting at. But if I remember correctly, Shin Haraguchi is a pretty gosh darn good wrestler. So that's going to be a test for him in this one. What are your thoughts on this matchup? What's kind of your experience from seeing both of these guys prior to, if you have, outside of obviously just the UFC stuff? And where do you think this one's going to go?
Yeah, I think I love this fight too. And this is, for me, this is maybe the hardest one to predict, just because Shin Haraguchi is one of the most hyped guys as well. And he mostly fought for the Japanese organization Grachan, and then he fought for Brawl, which is a promotion based out of Guam, and really just kind of cruised through everyone. Fought some really good fighters. He fought like UFC veteran now Yuki Kotani, and I think he finished him relatively easily. And so he's another really young Japanese fighter. I mean, like that friend in your chat mentioned, there's tons of amazing Japanese prospects coming up, mostly under the age of 25, and a lot of them undefeated. Tsuruya, Shin Haraguchi, Rongju. I agree. I don't think he got taken down once in the whole of season 2 of Road to UFC. And definitely he fought Kim Song-wook, the guy that was on a physical 100 in his last fight. And Kim, well, I mean, he's not the same wrestler that Shin Haraguchi is, but like he really tried to get Rongju down, and he defended all the shots, which was really impressive to me. And then in the opening round, Rongju fought Hong Sung Chan, which honestly, a lot of people may not know his name beforehand, but he he had a little bit of hype, and I had a lot of people, especially people close to him, telling me like, watch this guy, he's going to cruise through this tournament. And Rongju made it look like I'm in the UFC, you're not. But Hong Sung Chan, he fights again in Eternal MMA here in a couple weeks in Australia. And I wonder if we're really going to see how good this guy was, and that win's going to age really well for Rongju. But yeah, Rongju, like you said, he fights like a big guy. He's got a big frame. I think he's going to have 3 or 4 inch reach advantage over Shin Haraguchi. So he's going to be, if he's going to try and throw the jab, that's going to work for him. But what I think of for Rongju, the first thing I think of is just like so hyper aggressive. Like he's just always striking, and everything he throws so with so much power. And I'm just thinking through, like when he fought Kim Song-wook, like, Kim was throwing some punches, but then every time you saw Rongju land like a calf kick, it made Kim stutter a little bit. Every time he threw punches against Kim, immediately you saw his face start to mark up, start to get cut up. So, and then of course he knocked out Hong Sung Chan in the first round, relatively easy, pretty much like a perfect performance in the opening round. So I definitely agree. Rongju has leveled up quite a bit since being in the UFC, both in his striking and his takedown defense. So,
do you know if he's like switched gyms or something?
I think I don't think so. I think he's still with the UFC PI, and Shanghai is where he's been. Which, it's like, so the PI opened in 2019, and Rongju has pretty much been with them the whole time.
Makes sense.
But it's like 2019, that's 5 years ago now, but at the same time, that's not that long ago. I mean, this gym is still like getting calibrated. It's like, I guess it is a gym, but it's also kind of not a gym, but like they're still calibrating, they're figuring out their systems, their rhythms. And it takes a long time to be in a gym system before you really start to reap the rewards of that loyalty with your coaches and team, before they really start to know you inside and out. So I think it just took some time for them to really get in the rhythm. And again, this guy, Rongju, he's only 23 years old. So he's still maturing as a fighter. And, he's got a long future ahead of him. Maybe he'll go to the UFC. Maybe, if it doesn't work out for him, he'll fight again. And then he'll be back. Like, he has that much time in his career to go in and out of the UFC, even a couple times. So I think ultimately I am picking Rongju, but it all depends on if Shin Haraguchi can get him to the ground. Shin Haraguchi is an all-star wrestler. I mean, just top of the food chain kind of wrestler. Thinks, kind of like I was saying with Lee Kai-Wen in striking, like Shin Haraguchi thinks levels above everybody else. He's the kind of guy that can maneuver around different angles. He controls your legs and your arms at the same time when he's got you pinned down. My biggest concern with Shin Haraguchi is that he's still, at least in my perception, still kind of transitioning from being a wrestler to a full MMA fighter. When he fought Windry Patalima in the first round of the tournament, he got him down and just kind of held him down for the first round and hardly even threw any strikes. And then the second round starts and the exact same thing happens. And then it almost was like a light bulb came on, or I don't know if his coaches said something like, hey man, like try throwing some punches. And he just started throwing some punches. They weren't even powerful punches, but he had Patalima locked down. He couldn't move. And eventually the ref just had to stop the fight because it wasn't going anywhere. So, and we saw a little bit of that in the second round too. It seemed like Haraguchi had a hard time mixing in strikes to his wrestling. And so Rongju, being a guy that inflicts a lot of damage from a lot of different angles, if Haraguchi's just going to wrestle him, I'm worried that he's not going to be able to create enough damaging offense or maybe even submissions. He hasn't even attempted a whole lot of submissions. I'm worried that he's not going to put out enough offense to get enough points on the board when the judges' scorecards are read.
He's very much a control-first guy. And so Zazakita threw something out there that I actually agree with entirely, is that he's very small for lightweight. Like, he easily could be a 145er or possibly a 135er, like Zazakita said. And he went on to say that, yeah, in Japan, they don't cut as much weight as in the UFC. So I could see that being an issue here too. Like you said, Rongju fights big. Obviously, if you're Haraguchi and you're, going to just be outsized because Rong Ju has been to the UFC. He knows the weight cut thing. Like he's a thick dude. So do you think that size disadvantage is going to be an issue for him in this matchup, or do you think it's more going to be just like you said, the damaging with the strikes and Haraguchi not really putting it all together? Do you think the size is going to play a role too, or do you think he's going to be able to outmaneuver him with the grappling in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think he's going to have the hardest time of this tournament getting Rong Ju to the ground. Even like Park Jae-hyun, the guy that he fought in the middle round, and Park took that fight on like a couple days notice, or maybe even like 1 day's notice. He was an alternate. And so he didn't even prepare for the takedowns. But what I saw from Park was able to get back up to his feet over and over and over again, even as Shin landed completed 14 or so takedowns in that fight. So Rong Ju is going to be a tough guy to take down and hold down because he is so big. I could be wrong on that. Maybe he's prepared really well for the style of Rong Ju, but definitely I could see him having trouble keeping Rong Ju down for sure.
Yeah. And, so typically, like I said, I like to side with the wrestlers, but like it's the big size disadvantage for Haraguchi. And I do think this is going to be the hardest person for him to take down. And with him not really having a striking, he doesn't have a chance in the striking. Let's be honest. He's going to get destroyed if it stays a striking matchup. It's not going to be close. That makes me worry for a guy like Haraguchi in this fight because, like, what happens if he doesn't get a takedown? What does he go to next? What are his options? Like, does he even have an option too? What do you think?
Well, we really haven't seen much of his striking. And if we have, it's been several fights since we saw it, just because he shoots so quickly into the fight and has not really even on the ground, hasn't tried to strike a whole lot. So I don't really know what to expect from that. If anything, he really hasn't had a lot of experience striking in an MMA fight. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean he doesn't have it. And doesn't mean, if he has he's a very athletic guy, that's for sure. So even if you're not the best striker, if you're really athletic, sometimes you can make it work, get a couple really damaging strikes together if you're really strong. But I agree. I think this is going to be bad news, especially if Rong Ju is learning to time, a knee, an uppercut, some of these kind of anti-wrestler strikes. I think it could be bad news for Shin Haraguchi.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. Real quick, I want to shout out a couple of people in the chat. We've got J.R. Smith Bowl of Soup. He's down here. He's loving the breakdown. You know what, J.R. Smith? I appreciate you, brother. You're a good guy. You're always here. McPooperton with a horribly funny name. Yeah, dude, we're diving deep, man. I'm not going to miss a card like this. I love these Road to UFC tournaments. They're fantastic. And it gave me an opportunity to invite someone on I've never had on the channel, and Chris here, who is an expert on these fighters. If you missed the early part of the breakdown, Chris is an expert on all things Asian MMA. So having him here to help me break down these fighters that I can't even pronounce half their names, it really helps a lot. I watched the tournament. I've watched a little bit of their regional stuff. Some of it's hard to find. Some of it's really hard to get a lot out of. So having Chris here has helped out a ton for that. Now let's go ahead and chat a little bit about what I think in this matchup. So here's the deal. The Rong Ju side seems like the obvious side. I feel like every time I play the fight out in my head, like, how does this go? How does this go? Even if Haraguchi gets a couple of takedowns, he's got to do that 3 times. Because like you kind of mentioned, he doesn't throw a ton of ground and pound. He doesn't do a lot of striking. He doesn't do a lot of damage. And he just doesn't go for a lot of submissions. When I pull up his record, yes, he has some ground and pound finishes. But kind of like you said, like his coaches had to tell him to do that. Obviously, he got the decision win in his last fight. He's got the ground and pound win in the first Road to UFC tournament. And then he has some others that are just they are ground and pound wins, but over guys that he's not. They're not the level of a guy like Rong Ju. Like he's got he's got a TKO stoppage over a guy that's 37-17. That's cool, but that dude's got some miles on him. He's 42 years old now. So what does that tell you about it? It doesn't tell you a ton. For me, I think you might be right about that he's just not putting out enough ground and pound to win the damage kind of aspect of it all. I think you kind of have to side with the Rong Ju side, even though going into this, I wanted to pick Haraguchi. And I think if he goes down to 145, maybe 135 even, I do think he's going to have a shot at making it back through the tournament and coming back in. And he's 24 25 right now. 25 right now. He's only 5'6". So a guy like that, 5'6", easily a 135 or 145 pounder. He's not the biggest. I think he's got a shot to get back in, but I think Rong Zhu is going to be too much for him here, and I think he's going to get it done. I think he's probably going to get the finish because I think it's going to be one of those things where a guy that's just shooting for takedowns, when that fails, he has nothing else to go for, especially in this matchup. So for me, yeah, you got to side with the Rong Zhu side. And it's interesting, though, because when we look at this matchup, or like that, just this matchup in general, the whole tournament, it's somehow – it's funny how they came – in with all these fighters from different nations, different whatever, different backgrounds. And we ended up with just Japan and China in the finals. And those are the two countries that going in had the most amount of talent already in the UFC or in the running. It's funny because there was a guy in this tournament that I actually happened to know personally. He lived, I live in Omaha, Nebraska. He lived and trained here. And as an amateur, it was Sumit Kumar. He actually just trained at my buddy's house for a couple of his amateur fights. I'm not even joking. Like, he's trained in my buddy's basement for a couple of his amateur fights. So like, I obviously thought he was going to win, but that was biased as heck, so it doesn't really count. But like, so in this, he was coming from the India side. You had a lot of Korean fighters. But somehow we've ended up with just Japan and China. Do you think that those are the two countries that in Asia, in the Asian market in general, have the most talent right now? Or do you think it was just a situation where UFC didn't tap into the market before, like Ryzen and won championships, stuff like that, got to those fighters?
That's a great question. I do think that Korea is, they don't have the long history that Japan does. No one does, but Korean MMA, I feel like, is on fire right now. And they had some pretty good fighters in the tournament last year. They didn't have all the best Korean fighters, in my opinion, but they had a lot of really good ones. Some of them just didn't have good showings. They got tough opponents. For crying out loud, they were fighting in the Chinese fighters, or at least, most of the Chinese fighters, literally in their gym. So
that's true.
It was I think it was a big advantage for those Chinese fighters. And we saw them perform really, really well in this tournament, especially in the opening round. So I think that was part of it too. But Korean MMA, there's so many great fighters that I really like there. It seems like Japanese MMA, and we're kind of alluding to it almost from like the 2010s, during those years. It's really just the last couple years we've gotten some new, really young fighters cropping up. But it seems like maybe, I don't know what it was, maybe the training started to fall behind a little bit, at least like that elite level training. There wasn't a whole lot of Japanese fighters getting outside of Japan to train. So I think finally the training is starting to catch up again in Japan, and we're starting to see a lot of these amazing prospects. But we do have Lee Chong-ho technically in the finals. That fight is going to be postponed.
True.
No idea when it's going to be postponed to or where, but he's a solid fighter, kind of a ground and pound guy. But Korea, I think, especially in this next year too, whenever season 3 happens, probably either mid-May to end of May, it's going to probably be dominated by those 3 East Asian countries again. It seems, like there's almost kind of 2 tiers now. And it's interesting you brought up Sumit Kumar because he is going to be training at the UFC PI in Shanghai anytime. I thought he was going to go this month, but I don't think he's there just yet. I need to ask him because we chat sometimes too. But
oh, nice.
He and 3 other Indian fighters are going to go to the PI in Shanghai for 6 months to train. And at the end of that, I guess they'll probably miss Road to UFC this year, but either make it next year, or there is a possibility even to go on Contender Series. I don't know if they're ready for that. I just think countries like Indonesia and India need just some more time on the international. It sounds stupid to say international regional scene, but like the UAE Warriors, all these promotions that are bringing in fighters from different countries. I think the Indian and Indonesian fighters need more time on that kind of middle circuit before they hop into Road to UFC. There's a couple of them that I think could be good there. There's an Indonesian guy fighting this weekend in a One Pride fight night that I think could be there. And some of the guys from last year you could see come back again, but I think it's going to be a couple years of China, Korea, Japan dominating the scene.
That makes sense. And they're kind of, like you said, they're countries that have already had fighters, coming up. So it makes sense that they're now still having fighters coming up. And some of the other countries, it's new. Like India, for example, there wasn't a single fighter from India in the UFC until just recently. And that's throughout the entire time. There was a couple of people who were of Indian descent, but not from India. So that makes sense. Next time you talk to Sumit Kumar, ask him about his time training at the Huff House with Scott Huff as his coach.
I totally will.
That. Yeah,
I've been meaning to interview him. I'm supposed to interview him at some point while he's in Shanghai.
Nice.
And just ask how things are going up there. So yeah, excited to talk to him.
Yeah, I remember I remember watching him as an amateur fight here in Nebraska. It was wild. He couldn't strike back then either. So it was all grappling. He's
a beast though. He's an athletic freak.
Absolute beast. And he's durable as heck. And he just keeps coming. So
yeah,
I was rooting for him hard. I hope he gets in the tournament next year.
Yeah.
And then before we wrap up, just kind of thinking like, who do you think, since you kind of know these guys, I'm showing this one at you out of left field. So if you don't have you don't have more than a couple answers, I don't blame you. But who do you see in the regional scene there that maybe would be a good fit for next year, or I guess this year technically, because this is the 2023 tournament that's wrapping up now. Who would you see as like a potential that you'd like to see in the tournament for the next season 3 of the Road to UFC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a guy that just fought last weekend against another Road to UFC alum, Bala Jean, in a Chinese promotion called JCK, which I would say is probably the top Chinese promotion right now, just doing all the right things, growing really well. Amazing promotion. They put on a lightweight title fight between Bala Jean and this other guy named Ali Mulatabieka. He's a Chinese Kazakh guy that actually was supposed to be on Road to UFC the first season, but had some visa issues, had to drop out. But he put on a great performance against Bala Jean and took him out with punches on the feet in round 5, won the JCK lightweight tournament. He is pretty much my top Chinese prospect that is not already in like Road to UFC currently. There's a ton of other Chinese guys that I could talk your ear off about. Baargung Jela Isa, another Chinese Kazakh guy, just fought in Alash Pride FC, which is a Kazakh promotion. He fought and won this last weekend as well. Wang Ji-jung is another great fighter who is the JCK featherweight champion. Really fun striker. He's out in Thailand training right now. I could see him being there. I would say for Korea, oh gosh, I feel like I could go on. I'm trying to be like, okay, you only get one.
There you go.
So there's this guy, he's either going to be in the UFC next or Road to UFC. And like, I've actually heard that from his team, a guy named Kim Tae-kyun. He is I think he's 10-1 now. He just fought in UAE Warriors 2 Saturdays ago and beat a UFC veteran in Carl John de Thomas. But he is 10-1. He's fought a lot for Brave CF. He had a main event against Roman Bogatov, who is another UFC alum, and lost a crazy close split decision to him. And I had been told for a long time, if he wins one more time, he's going to be in the UFC. So either he's going to be in UFC or Road to UFC. I think he should be in UFC. I hate that like every single Asian fighter now, like they have to go through Road to UFC. It's like, no, some of them are good enough to get in, but I still appreciate the Road to UFC system. And then let me pull one out of left field a little bit that people may not know as much about. Okay, Indonesia. They struggled a lot this last year in Road to UFC. And honestly, I think that even though the first season they had a guy get to the finals, I think that the second season they had a stronger overall batch of fighters. They had really tough matchups and they are still just coming along. But there's a guy fighting this weekend in One Pride MMA. He is the One Pride, One Pride is the top Indonesian promotion. Yudi Kayati, 6-1 Indonesian featherweight, amazing striker, a lot of finishes. He's fighting he's fighting a 5-0 fighter in the main, or probably in the co-main event of this One Pride Fight Night. And he is a guy that I've got circled as he could be a new face. I mean, some of these guys from last year could come back, but he's a new face. I'm not saying he could win the whole tournament, but he is the Indonesian fighter that will probably be a new face in the tournament this upcoming year.
So obviously awesome. Those, I haven't heard of most of them, so that's cool. That's really good. I'm obviously tapped into the regional scene around here, but like it's interesting to talk to people that have different experience with regional scenes. Like for example, my buddy Artem has a channel as well, and he's from New Zealand. So the
I know him,
Australian New Zealand guys, he knows all about them guys. Like he's already got like whenever one of them shows up on like the Contender Series, he's like, oh yeah, I've seen him fight already. He's like, so it's just kind of who's tapped into what areas of the world. Sazakita, another one out there. I don't know who Shin Ryu is. Sounds like a Street Fighter character, to be honest. But
he just fought in the last Ryzen main event against Kyoji Horiguchi. That's his nickname.
Oh, that's who that was.
Takahashi. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He's amazing.
Yeah, that'd be interesting if made the trip over. I do know who Kyoji Horiguchi is, but obviously I just know that from like Bellator and stuff. So,
totally.
How it is. But that would be sick. Like there are a lot of those prospects out there that I just don't know about. I do think Ryzen has the coolest rule set as far as like how they handle all that stuff. I go back and forth on whether I like the ring or the cage better. They both have their ups and downs. But yeah, like Ryzen's got a fantastic rule set, because watching the Bellator versus Ryzen fights, it was interesting because they've done it twice now. And I think in one of them they did Bellator rules, and the other they did Ryzen rules, if I'm not mistaken, because they did like the cage in one, and one of the matchups they had, and then in the other one they did the ring. And it was kind of interesting to see just like how that works. And then obviously there's some guys that fought for both of them, so like didn't really count. They were both teams, but either way, like that kind of stuff. I love that they mix in the the different brands and stuff. You'll never see that from the UFC. You're never gonna see like UFC and freaking ONE FC together. Like you'll never see that, but
nope.
But you'll see the talent come through. And like you said, it's kind of a love-hate thing with the Road to UFC. I love the tournament. It gets eyes on these guys coming from, the Asian market. But like you said, they're going to have to come through this now. Kind of like if you're, coming off the regional scene from, say, like Mexico or whatever, you're probably going through the Contender Series. The only people that really just get to go straight in now are guys they can call on short notice that live in the States, because they can make it happen quick. Unless they happen to be at a foreign card, then you might luck out. But typically it's going to be, if you're in the US and we can call you on short notice, awesome. Otherwise, you're either coming through Road to UFC if you're from Asia, or you're coming through the Contender Series anywhere else. And I get it. It is a good funnel, but it's just the Road to UFC tournament's not as easy to get on as the Contender Series, considering there's just one tournament. That's it. And they have a handful of weight classes. And I think next year they were talking about having a couple of women's divisions and even welterweight for the men, which will be interesting because obviously Asian MMA promotions, they're more of the lighter weight class focused a lot of the time. That's where you get a lot of the prospects. Like there's not a ton of Asian MMA prospects. There's a few in the heavier divisions in the UFC, but not a ton. And I think that's just, kind of just statures that people have. But yeah, I guess kind of wrap things up kind of in a nice tight little bow to go over who we both picked. So we agreed on 2 of the 3 fights on who we think was going to win. It was, we both picked Zhu Rong or Rong Zhu. We both picked Ray Saruya, and then we were opposite sides in Lee Kai Win versus Yi Jia. So for everybody in the chat, you guys were fantastic. I appreciate all of you, especially Sasakita coming through with all of the information here. So that was wonderful. Chris, tell everybody where they can find you. Tell them where they can, get all of your content, whether that be your, social medias or whatever, or if you have any like paid stuff that they can get behind a paywall or anything like that. Tell them where they can find it. Tell them anything you're hyped about that's coming up that you're going to be putting out soon. And I'm going to tell everybody they need to go watch your ONE video, your ONE FC video. It was great. I actually watched it last night for the first time, and I was super thrilled to see it. It pointed out a lot of the things that I didn't even realize were the reasons I wasn't watching ONE FC as often as I would like to. But yeah, so Chris, tell everybody where they can find you, what you're excited about, and let them know.
Yeah, really appreciate that, bro. So honestly, you type in MMA ecosystem just about anywhere, and you're gonna find your way to me. So YouTube, I've got a video coming. Actually, my own Road to UFC preview is coming out, gosh, in a couple hours. So if you want to hear me expand just a little bit more on what I said there, hit that up. Hit up that that one championship video. Instagram, I'm very active on Instagram, and the funnest, exciting news is that I've got a brand new website, MMAecosystem.com, just came out a week ago. I haven't really even promoted a whole lot, kind of a soft opening, but all the news, like if you stay locked to that website, all the Asian MMA news, it's all there. My whole calendar, for crying out loud, of Asian MMA, also got like UFC, PFL, Bellator, One Championship, all that on there. But my whole calendar is on there, how to watch it, what time, who's fighting, highlighted prospects, kind of a one-stop shop for any kind of resource that you want for Asian MMA. And it's just going to keep growing from there. And really appreciate you having me on, man.
Awesome, dude. And so for everybody that's watching the replay of this and not live, I'm going to put on the end screen a link to, it'll pop up for Chris's video of his breakdown of this same fight card. And then also I'm going to put it in the description, a link to his website. You guys can check all of that stuff out. This was a good time. I enjoyed the heck out of this. Everybody also buy one of my t-shirts. Everybody, if you haven't done it yet, links in the description. But yeah, it was awesome. Thanks, Chris. And we will chat. We'll see you guys down the road.
Thanks, guys.